On the morning of December 7, 1941, a Pacific storm saved one of the most important warships in American history. USS Enterprise was supposed to be in Pearl Harbor that Sunday morning, moored alongside the battleships that would burn and sink beneath Japanese bombs. Instead, heavy seas had delayed her return by just 18 hours. That twist of fate would prove decisive not just for one ship, but for the entire Pacific War. Over the next 4 years, Enterprise would fight in nearly every major naval battle of the conflict. She would be bombed, torpedoed, and struck by kamikazes. The Japanese would announce her sinking 3 separate times. Each time, she returned to battle, earning herself a ghostly nickname that her enemies came to dread. By war's end, she would become the most decorated warship in American naval history, earning 20 battle stars and destroying more enemy ships and aircraft than any vessel afloat. But here is the remarkable truth at the heart of her story. Enterprise was one of 3 Yorktown-class carriers built in the 1930s. Her sister ships, Yorktown and Hornet, were sunk within months of each other. Enterprise alone survived the entire war. How one ship endured what destroyed the others would become one of the great mysteries of the Pacific campaign. This is the story of Enterprise, the Gray Ghost, the ship that would not die. She began as hull number 409 at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. Her keel was laid on July 16, 1934, one of 2 fleet carriers authorized under President Roosevelt's National Industrial Recovery Act. 3 years later, on October 3, 1936, she slid into the waters of the James River, christened by the wife of Navy Secretary Claude Swanson. Enterprise was massive by the standards of her time. At 809 feet in length and displacing 25,000 tons fully loaded, she could carry 90 aircraft and make over 32 knots. Her crew of more than 2,000 men lived and worked inside a floating city of steel, aviation fuel, and high explosives. She was, in every sense, a weapon designed for a new kind of warfare, one that few admirals yet understood. On May 12, 1938, Enterprise was commissioned into the United States Navy. She would spend the next 3 years training pilots and perfecting the complex dance of launching and recovering aircraft from a moving platform. By the autumn of 1941, she was based at Pearl Harbor, the tip of America's Pacific spear. Her captain was George Murray. Her task force commander was Vice Admiral William Halsey, a man whose aggressive spirit would become legendary. In late November 1941, with diplomatic relations with Japan deteriorating by the hour, Enterprise received urgent orders. She was to deliver 12 Marine Corps Wildcat fighters to the isolated outpost of Wake Island, more than 2,000 miles to the west. Halsey, sensing that war was imminent, placed his entire task force on combat footing. Aircraft were armed with live ammunition. Gun crews stood ready around the clock. Halsey's orders were explicit. If they encountered Japanese forces, they were to shoot first and ask questions later. Enterprise delivered her fighters to Wake on December 2nd and turned for home. She was scheduled to enter Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 6th. But the same weather system that had concealed the approaching Japanese strike force now worked against the American carrier. Heavy seas slowed her escorts and split the hull seams of one destroyer. The schedule slipped, first to the morning of December 7th. Then to midday. At dawn on that fateful Sunday, Enterprise was still 215 miles from Oahu. She launched 18 scout bombers on a routine morning patrol, with orders to land at Ford Island Naval Air Station after their search. The pilots flew toward Pearl Harbor expecting a quiet Sunday in paradise. What they found instead was their country at war. Ensign Manuel Gonzalez was the first to see the smoke. At first he thought it was burning sugarcane. Then he noticed aircraft circling at low altitude with red circles on their wings. Within seconds, Japanese Zero fighters were on his tail. Gonzalez desperately radioed Enterprise with words that would echo through history. "Please don't shoot. This is an American plane." Back on Enterprise, the message ignited pandemonium. Halsey, receiving fragmentary reports of the attack, issued new orders with characteristic fury. "Find the Japanese fleet. Sink anything in your path. Before we are through with them," he declared, "the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell." But tragedy was not yet finished with Enterprise that day. As darkness fell, 6 Wildcat fighters were ordered to divert to Ford Island rather than attempt a night landing on the carrier. The pilots approached a blacked-out Oahu, the only lights visible coming from fires still burning across Pearl Harbor. Word was passed to hold anti-aircraft fire. The Wildcats were coming in. The message never reached everyone. As the fighters crossed Ford Island, a few scattered shots were fired. Then, every gun on the island opened up. The sky erupted in tracer fire. 3 Enterprise pilots were killed, including one man who was shot out of his parachute as he floated helplessly toward the ground. Fighting 6 had lost 5 aircraft and 3 men without ever seeing a Japanese enemy. The cruelest irony of December 7th was this: Enterprise was the only American carrier with men in the air over Pearl Harbor. She was also the first carrier to sustain casualties in the Pacific War, and yet she had been spared the devastation that consumed the battle line. In the desperate months that followed, Enterprise became the tip of America's counteroffensive. While other commanders urged caution, Halsey pushed his single carrier deep into enemy waters. On February 1, 1942, Enterprise aircraft struck the Marshall Islands in the first American offensive action of the Pacific War. 6 weeks later, she raided Wake Island, then Marcus Island, just 1,200 miles from Tokyo itself. But her most important mission came in April 1942. Enterprise served as the escort carrier for a strike that would shake Japan to its core. 16 Army B-25 bombers, lashed to the deck of her sister ship Hornet, would be launched to bomb Tokyo. Enterprise provided the fighter cover that kept the task force safe as it pushed deep into enemy waters. The Doolittle Raid, as it became known, inflicted minimal physical damage, but its psychological impact was profound. Admiral Yamamoto, Japan's greatest naval strategist, became obsessed with destroying the American carrier fleet that had humiliated him. He would get his chance in June 1942 at a tiny atoll called Midway. The Battle of Midway would determine whether Japan or America controlled the Pacific Ocean. Yamamoto assembled the largest fleet Japan had ever sent to sea: 4 fleet carriers, 7 battleships, more than 80 warships in total, carrying hundreds of aircraft and Japan's finest pilots. Their objective was simple: capture Midway Island and destroy any American carriers that came to its defense. But American codebreakers had penetrated Japanese communications. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew where the attack was coming and when. He ordered every available carrier to intercept. Enterprise sailed from Pearl Harbor on May 28th, but she sailed without William Halsey. The Bull had been hospitalized with a severe skin condition, so ill he could barely stand. Missing Midway, Halsey would later say, was the greatest disappointment of his life. In his place, he recommended a cruiser admiral named Raymond Spruance, a man who had never commanded carriers in combat. It was an unlikely choice that would prove inspired. Enterprise joined her sister ships Yorktown and Hornet northeast of Midway at a position designated Point Luck. 3 American carriers with 233 aircraft would face 4 Japanese carriers with nearly 270 planes. The odds favored Japan. But the Americans had one advantage Yamamoto did not know about. They knew he was coming. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Japanese aircraft struck Midway Island while American search planes hunted for the enemy fleet. When reports finally confirmed the Japanese position, Spruance made a fateful decision. He would launch everything, immediately, at maximum range. His pilots would have barely enough fuel to attack and return. Enterprise began launching at 7:06 in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, the air group commander, led 33 dive bombers into the sky. Torpedo Squadron 6 followed with 14 aircraft. The attack force turned southwest toward the reported position of the Japanese fleet. What happened next would nearly end in disaster. The Japanese carriers were not where intelligence had placed them. Admiral Nagumo had changed course, and McCluskey's dive bombers found only empty ocean. Fuel gauges dropped toward empty. The logical choice was to turn back. McCluskey had no way of knowing that at that moment the Japanese were preparing to launch a devastating counterstrike against the American fleet. If he turned back, those Japanese aircraft would destroy Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet. McCluskey did not turn back. Instead, he continued searching north, gambling that if the Japanese were to the south, patrol planes would have spotted them. Then he saw it. a lone Japanese destroyer racing northeast at high speed, trailing a long white wake across the blue Pacific. The destroyer Arashi had been left behind to depth charge an American submarine. Now she was racing to rejoin her fleet. McCluskey followed that wake. At 10:20, his pilots spotted the Japanese carriers. 4 massive flight decks crowded with aircraft being armed and fueled for the counterstrike. The timing was catastrophic for Japan. The Americans had arrived at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. McCluskey pushed over into his dive. Behind him, 32 other pilots followed. At 10:22, lookouts on the carrier Akagi screamed a warning: Helldivers. In the next 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were turned into blazing wrecks. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher scored the first hit on Kaga, his bombs smashing through the flight deck into the hangars below. As his aircraft pulled out of the dive, one thought went through his mind: Arizona, I remember you. Lieutenant Richard Best, seeing most of his squadron attacking Kaga, peeled off with just 2 wingmen to strike Akagi, the enemy flagship. His single bomb crashed through the deck and detonated among fueled and armed aircraft. The resulting explosion consumed the carrier. Simultaneously, buzz bombers from Yorktown devastated the carrier Soryu. 3 direct hits turned her into an inferno within seconds. In 5 minutes, the most powerful carrier force in the world had been destroyed. Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific was broken forever. Enterprise pilots had sunk or mortally wounded 2 of the 4 carriers. But the battle was not over. 1 Japanese carrier remained. Hiryu launched 2 counterstrikes that afternoon, both aimed at Yorktown. Enterprise's sister ship was hit by 3 bombs and 2 torpedoes. She was eventually finished off by a Japanese submarine, becoming the first of the 3 Yorktown-class carriers to die. That evening, Enterprise launched a final strike against Hiryu. Lieutenant Gallagher, who had bombed Kaga that morning, led 24 dive bombers against the last Japanese carrier. 4 bombs found their mark. Hiryu's forward elevator was blown completely out of its well, hurled against the ship's bridge. She sank the following morning. Midway was an overwhelming American victory. 4 Japanese carriers sunk. Japan's veteran pilots, irreplaceable after years of training, lost to the depths of the Pacific. The tide of the war had turned in 5 decisive minutes. Enterprise emerged from Midway without a scratch. Yorktown lay at the bottom of the ocean. It was a pattern that would repeat itself with terrible regularity. The Guadalcanal campaign would test Enterprise like nothing before. In August 1942, American Marines landed on that jungle-covered island to capture a Japanese airfield. Enterprise sailed south to provide air cover for the invasion, beginning a 3-month ordeal that would nearly destroy her. On August 24th, at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, Japanese bombers found Enterprise. More than 30 dive bombers attacked in a 5-minute fury that seemed to last forever. 3 bombs smashed through her flight deck. 4 near misses bent her hull plates and tore away equipment. 74 men were killed, 95 more were wounded. But Enterprise did not sink. Her damage control teams, the best trained in the fleet, fought fires and sealed flooding compartments. She limped back to Pearl Harbor under her own power, where shipyard workers labored around the clock to put her back together. 7 weeks later, she was heading back to war. She arrived just in time for the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. On October 26, 1942, Enterprise and Hornet faced 4 Japanese carriers in the most intense carrier duel of the Pacific War. Enterprise was initially hidden by a rain squall, leaving Hornet to bear the full weight of the first Japanese attack. Hornet was hit by 4 bombs, 2 torpedoes, and 2 crashed aircraft in suicide dives. She lost power and went dead in the water. Then the Japanese found Enterprise. 24 dive bombers attacked in a single coordinated strike. 2 bombs smashed through her flight deck. Another 2 near misses tore at her hull. 44 more men died. But once again, Enterprise survived. Hornet did not. Unable to be towed and impossible to scuttle, the burning carrier was finally finished off by Japanese destroyers. She went down taking 140 men with her, the last American fleet carrier ever sunk by enemy action. When the smoke cleared, a terrible reality confronted the United States Navy. Enterprise was now the only operational American carrier in the entire Pacific Ocean. Yorktown was gone. Hornet was gone. Saratoga was under repair after torpedo damage. Wasp had been sunk by a submarine 6 weeks earlier. The entire war in the Pacific now rested on a single damaged ship and her exhausted crew. Someone aboard Enterprise put up a sign that captured the moment perfectly: Enterprise versus Japan. But the Japanese were not finished. A massive enemy, thrust toward Guadalcanal, demanded that Enterprise return to combat immediately. She sailed from Noumea on November 11th, her flight deck still shaking from the hammers of repair crews who remained aboard. Welders worked through the night as the carrier steamed toward battle. Her forward elevator was still jammed from the bomb hit at Santa Cruz. She went to war anyway. What followed was extraordinary. Operating from a barely functional flight deck, Enterprise aircraft helped sink the battleship Hiei, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. They destroyed the cruiser Kinugasa and mauled an entire Japanese reinforcement convoy. When the naval battle of Guadalcanal ended on November 15th, Enterprise had shared credit for 16 ships sunk and 8 more damaged. The captain sent a message to the Navy Department praising the repair crews. The emergency repairs accomplished by this skillful and enthusiastically energetic force have placed this vessel in condition for further action against the enemy. Admiral Halsey, who had returned to command the South Pacific forces, sent his own commendation. These men showed willingness, zeal, and capability beyond all expectation. The Japanese, meanwhile, had announced that Enterprise had been sunk. Again, it was at least the second time they had made that claim. Each time, the gray ghost returned to haunt them. By the end of 1942, Enterprise had earned more battle stars than any other ship in the fleet. But her war was far from over. After extensive repairs and upgrades, including the addition of dozens of anti-aircraft guns and the latest radar systems, she returned to combat in late 1943. In November, she introduced carrier-based night fighters to the Pacific, a revolutionary capability that would change naval warfare forever. The first night mission was led by Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, the Medal of Honor recipient and first Navy ace of the war. O'Hare was killed during that mission, shot down in the darkness while protecting Enterprise from enemy bombers. Chicago's International Airport would later bear his name. Through 1944, Enterprise was in the thick of every major operation. She participated in the strikes against Truk Lagoon, Japan's greatest Pacific fortress, where her aircraft launched the first night radar bombing attack from an American carrier. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, her fighters helped destroy more than 400 Japanese aircraft in a single day. At Leyte Gulf in October, the largest naval battle in history, Enterprise bombers attacked the super battleship Musashi, scoring 4 direct hits with 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs. Musashi eventually sank after absorbing 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs from the combined American fleet. In December 1944, Enterprise was converted into the Navy's first dedicated night carrier, redesignated CVN-6. She carried a specially trained air group capable of around-the-clock operations, a capability that no other fleet carrier possessed. At Iwo Jima in February 1945, Enterprise set a record that still stands in naval aviation history. For 174 consecutive hours, more than 7 days, she maintained continuous flight operations, launching and recovering aircraft without pause. Her pilots provided vital air support for the Marines fighting ashore. Only severe weather finally forced her to stop. But the kamikazes were waiting. Japan's suicide attacks represented something American sailors had never faced before. Young Japanese pilots, deliberately crashing their bomb-laden aircraft into ships, went beyond anything the crew of Enterprise understood as fair fighting. The kamikaze disoriented. It terrified. It assaulted a man's hope that he might make it home alive. On April 11, 1945, off Okinawa, kamikazes found Enterprise. 2 suicide aircraft crashed within yards of the ship, wrenching her hull and killing 1 man. She withdrew for repairs, then returned to combat 3 weeks later. On May 14, 1945, her luck finally ran out. A Zero fighter piloted by Lieutenant Junior Grade Shunsuke Tomiyasu penetrated the destroyer screen by hopping from cloud to cloud. As he approached Enterprise from astern, he executed a snap roll, flipping his aircraft onto its back in a final display of airmanship. Then he dove through the flight deck just behind the forward elevator. The explosion was catastrophic. The 15-ton elevator was blown 400 feet into the air, tumbling end over end before crashing back into the sea. 14 men were killed, 68 more were wounded. Enterprise never left her station or lost speed, but her fighting efficiency was compromised beyond immediate repair. On May 16, 1945, Enterprise withdrew from combat for the last time. She was the last carrier struck by a kamikaze in the war. Her fight was over. But what a fight it had been. By the time Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945, Enterprise had earned 20 battle stars, 3 more than any other American warship. Her aircraft and guns had destroyed 911 enemy aircraft, sunk 71 Shokuum ships, and damaged 192 more. She had steamed more than 275,000 miles in combat operations. She had participated in 18 of the 20 major naval actions in the Pacific. She was the only ship to receive both the Presidential Unit Citation and the Navy Unit Commendation for her World War II service. She was the only foreign vessel ever to fly the British Admiralty pennant, an honor dating back 400 years. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal called her the one ship that most nearly symbolizes the history of the United States Navy in World War II. And she was the only one of her sisters to survive. Why did Enterprise live when Yorktown and Hornet died? Part of the answer lies in chance. Yorktown absorbed attacks that might have found Enterprise. Hornet was caught without cover while Enterprise sheltered in a rain squall. But chance does not explain everything. Enterprise had something more. Her damage control teams were exceptional, among the best in the fleet. Her crew had developed an almost supernatural ability to keep their wounded ship fighting. Each time she was hit, they brought her back. After the war, efforts were made to preserve Enterprise as a museum ship. Admiral Halsey lent his name to the campaign. Congress passed a resolution authorizing a national memorial. But America in 1946 wanted to forget the war, not remember it. The fundraising failed. On July 1, 1958, Enterprise was sold for scrap to a New York salvage company for $561,333. She was broken up at Kearny, New Jersey. By May 1960, nothing remained of the most decorated warship in American history but memories and a few salvaged artifacts. Today, her stern nameplate rests at a museum in New Jersey. Her bell sits at the Naval Academy, rung only after victories over Army. Her spirit lives on in the nuclear carriers that have carried her name, first CVN-65 and now CVN-80, currently under construction at the same Newport News shipyard where she was born nearly a century ago. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, named his fictional starship Enterprise because he was fascinated by CV-6's war record. He always considered it a heroic ship, he said. Millions who have never heard of the Yorktown-class carrier know the name because of a television show inspired by her courage. But perhaps the truest memorial is simpler than any of these. It is the story itself. A ship built for a war no one wanted to fight. A crew that refused to let her die. 20 battle stars earned in the hardest years America ever faced. The Japanese called her the Gray Ghost because she kept returning from the dead. Her crew called her the Big E. History calls her the most decorated ship in the United States Navy. She was USS Enterprise CV-6, and she fought until there was nothing left to fight.